Good evening, welcome. I'm Deborah, one of the directors here at Ten2Two, and a very warm welcome to our interview tips webinar. It's one of our most popular webinars because there's some really useful hints and tips that you can take away from this and use if you're in any interview process or any coming up. So hopefully you'll get lots of good information. We will send a link to a recording out afterwards, so you don't need to write a load of notes. And we will, if we don't get to cover all of your questions, we will send a summary of questions that we didn't get around to answering by email in the next couple of days. So you can relax and just concentrate on the content. Just by way of background, for those of you who don't know, Ten2Two is a recruitment agency that specialises in part-time and flexible working. Got lots of experience in this space, so hopefully we can give you some valuable advice. Lots to cover, so I'm going to pass you straight over to Tracy, who's going to be running the webinar tonight. And if you've got any questions as we go through, if you pop them in the Q&A box, I'll keep an eye on those, answer them if I can, or we'll address them at the end. And we're going for about 30 minutes, Tracy?
Yeah. We'll aim.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Deborah, and welcome everybody. So as Deborah said, this is going to be a whiz through a lot of things to bear in mind when you've got an interview coming up. So let's look at the agenda. Let's go straight onto it. There we go. So first of all, why an interview? Let's look at the preparation. Just first of all, some basics and the content. Types of interviews and questions. We'll run through those. We're going to focus a little bit on competency-based questions because that comes up a lot and it is a really common part of interviews. Some things to think about on the day. Some of them you might think are quite basic, but it's always good to be reminded of this. Questions on the day when you're in the interview. It's always an awkward part at the end of an interview. Have you got any questions? We'll look at that. Then a wrap up and a summary, and then time at the end for your questions. So let's get going without further ado. So why an interview? So even though we've seen more testing in recent years in recruitment, an interview is still the main method of recruiting. And it serves a number of purposes, most of which are obvious, but it's worth quickly recapping. So first of all, it's the first chance the employer has to check if the person they meet can back up the paperwork they've seen. So it's really important that what you say and talk about matches your CV. It's an opportunity for the hiring manager to learn about your skill set and how you approach your work. It's a chance to see if you feel like the company and role is a good fit for you, as much as the company think that you're a fit for them. And a lot of people tend to forget this, and you'd be surprised actually at, let's say how frequently, but it does happen when candidates come away and go, that wasn't for me. So use this as an opportunity for you as well. And of course, it's a chance to evaluate the company and the role and an opportunity to visit the workplace. So those points are very sort of similar there. So how do you prepare? There's 4 key areas we'd suggest you consider. Again, some of these are obvious, but you'd be surprised for feedback from clients who've suggested that some candidates haven't put the effort into some of these areas, and that is clear feedback we do get from clients, from employers. So hopefully we can share some of that learning with you and that feedback. So in terms of your company and industry preparation and research, so make sure you've researched the company. If you can bear with me 1 second, my battery, rather strangely, is about to die on me. So it looks like the thing has dropped out. So if you can bear with me. There we go. Apologies. So make sure you've researched the company as much as you can. Use the company website to look for recent press releases, latest company news, their blogs. Think how that might relate to your role that you're going for. And of course, these days, social media is a really good source for up-to-date information. So, check out the company profile on LinkedIn, what they're saying on Facebook, even Instagram, Twitter. And actually, I think those channels almost give you a different perspective, a more relaxed perspective of what's going on in the company. So they're really good channels to look at for your research. Maybe pick up trade journals if they have a name for that particular sector. Search the internet to learn more about the industry that that company operates in. Try to get an understanding of where the company might sit amongst its competitors. So this is all good background research you can be doing. People. Look up the names of the hiring managers that you are going to be meeting, or hiring manager, if you can, online. You could try LinkedIn, you could try their website. The company website will probably have About Us page on there. It's quite a good advantage to know something about your potential interviewer. You might not use it in an interview, but it's just it's quite nice to know, and it can be quite reassuring sometimes. And it's not a bad thing if you do look them up on LinkedIn and they notice that you've looked them up on LinkedIn. That's not a bad thing at all. It shows that you are interested and you're doing your research. So, place. This sounds quite obvious. Double check the exact location of your interview. Check who you're meeting, where you're meeting them, how you access the building, the parking, where the station is, where you can park. And I know, today parking is all done on your phone or credit card, but if you're not sure, take change. I know it sounds like quite a mundane, sort of straightforward thing to know, but it's even worth doing a trial run at a weekend if you think the journey might be a bit tricky. So once you know that that's sorted and you've planned that, that's one thing off your list, and you can relax and focus on the rest of sort of the interview content. Dress. So first impressions are really powerful and very hard to change. So there is a sort of a known number, if you like, that it takes 4 seconds to make your first impression and 4 years to change a bad one. So, make your first few seconds count, really. And by that we mean, it's important that you dress appropriately. So if you haven't worked for a while and you're worried about what is dress code nowadays in businesses or certain types of businesses, ask friends, go online and look at the current trends in business dress, or look at the company website if you can see team photos to get an idea to tell you about dress code. If in doubt, ask the recruiter if they can find out for you or give you a steer. But regardless, I always feel it's better to go a bit smarter than you think you might need to. I don't think anybody's going to fault someone for looking a bit smarter at an interview. It's the place you would be smart, of all places. So remove any jewellery that could be considered unprofessional. It may be fine outside of work, but not every employer might think so. If you're a regular smoker or vapor, try not to smoke immediately before the interview, as it could be quite obvious to those who don't smoke. And be aware of how much perfume you're wearing as well. So little spritz, but not too much. So content, preparation for the interview. This is really important. So how are you going to show them that you're the best candidate for the job, and what can you do for the job and the company? So you've got to really understand the benefits you bring and the value of your experience. So in terms of these points, so points 1, 2, and 3 are all linked essentially. You need to really review the job description thoroughly. Or the job ad, whatever you've been given. Allocate some time to really go through your CV in detail, analysing your skill sets and finding those that are particularly relevant to the JD you've just got and been given, have been going through. So those 3 points, it is absolutely looking at your CV and the job description and tying them together and being able to support the JD with your evidence in your CV. Ensure you've thought through examples of previous experiences that would fit situations that may occur in this job. I think if you've got a long career, it's sometimes quite hard to remember all the good stuff you've done. So it's probably a good idea to have in your mind 3 or 4 or 5 stories or projects or situations or circumstances, something you delivered, something you were really proud of. that you can call on to answer a few questions, so that you'll probably need them to answer questions, hard to measure qualities like initiative, team skills, judgment, leadership. And with those, always try to remember and think of the achievements in those particular situations. And it might be an increase in sales, or it might be a delivery against timelines or something. So though that will come up against this with this theme again as we go through. It's these 3 or 4 examples that you can call on throughout the interview. And know your motivations and reasons. So do spend a little bit of time thinking about yourself and how you can be perceived as an interested and enthusiastic candidate. So be clear about why you want to do this job. Think about what you're going to say when the interviewer asks, and they probably will ask, why do you want this job? You know, what is it about the company that attracts you? Are you going to find the job rewarding? So for yourself, think, is it working in a team again that is really exciting you? Is it working in a growing business? Is it the sector? Is it the product? What is it that really excites you about the role? Now, we know in the line of work that we do for 10-2 that flexible hours may be ideal, and the company's offices might be close to home. And those might be really good, strong factors for you for going for a particular role. But just be careful about not positioning those as your primary reasons for going for the position. They might be nice to haves and enhance that opportunity, but try not to focus in on that during the interview. And we know, because many candidates we speak to are returning to work and looking for a flexible role, and perhaps aren't driven by career aspirations at this point, rather a better work-life balance, family life balance. So that's fine, but interviewers will be looking for a sense of your career direction and your desire and motivation to work for them. And don't be afraid to talk about what you bring to the role at whatever stage you're at in your career. You will always be bringing experience, adaptability, organisation. So be confident in what you're bringing. So let's look now at the types of interviews. So there are a few variations of interview types, and we've just listed the sort of most common ones here. Sometimes in the process, you might have one of each of these, and other times you might only have one. It just varies between organisation, depending on the seniority of the role, the size of the business, how many and who the key decision makers are. So looking at the first, telephone or video, usually an initial screening stage will be a telephone or video, and that's to see if there's a fit and if you'll be invited to the next stage. Obviously, during the pandemic, it was all video, but we are definitely seeing a return to the face-to-face interview now at some point in the process for a lot of employers. Face-to-face is becoming the most common format again, and you are likely to have a face-to-face at some point in the process. Often it's with 2 people from the organisation. Panel interviews are often used in more formal organisations, so public sector, charity, big corporates, and that's particularly where there's a lot of decision makers needed to reach a consensus. And big corporates will sometimes run assessment days if they're recruiting a cohort, for example. So you could come across all of these types, but the most common we see is an initial video with 1 or 2 people, followed by a face-to-face, often with one of the same and an additional decision maker. So you may be asked to prepare a presentation, and that's often for roles like marketing, HR, or sales, or a task at a second stage. And again, sometimes we see tasks for finance assistant type roles. It might be an in-tray Excel type task. And there are sometimes different psychometric tools that companies of different sizes use in the process. So what type of questions are you going to get? So you are likely to get a mixed type of questions, and we'll run through them. But the key message is, don't worry about the categories. Just understand really what the interviewer might be looking for when asking a question. So I think, the thing about interviewing is and something to remember is past behaviour is your best indicator of future performance. And that's the principle that questioning typically works on. So they are going to be exploring your past experience and behaviour. So let's have a look at the first ones. So this is a more sort of practical, straightforward one. Your work history. This is to establish the basic facts using your CV. So a typical question would be, can you briefly talk me through your CV? So with this, be succinct. You know, we might all have 2 or 3 page CVs. Don't spend half an hour talking through everything. You've got to be really succinct. Competency-based questions. So these are based on the skills needed to perform the job, and they will probably form a major part of the questioning in a lot of businesses. And these are asking questions around the skills needed. So, for example, one might be, tell me about a time when. That's a typical format. So, tell me a time when you supported a colleague who was struggling with an area of work. And this kind of question obviously is looking at teamwork here. So you need to think of an example to demonstrate that teamwork. There might be, give me an example of an experience that reflects your commitment to customer focus. Well, that's clearly how do you deal with clients and customers, and what good evidence have you got and successes have you got there? So I will touch on competency again a little bit in a short while. So just be aware of, they are typically tell me a time when or give me an example when questions. So next ones are behavioural. These seek to show how a candidate thinks. So give me here's an example I'll give you. Give an example of a time when you didn't meet a goal and how you handled this. This question is really looking at failure, how you deal with failure. So it could be you failed hitting a deadline for a project, you know, didn't hit a target. So they're asking you to explain how you felt about it, what you did, how you came back from it, and what you've learned. And then another example would be, tell me about a time when you had to persuade someone resistant to your direction to perform a task. That could be about resilience, it could be about leadership, you know, leading somebody. Leadership doesn't necessarily mean leading a team. Leadership could be leading people through your thoughts and your project or your process. And then finally, there might be values-based questions to see if your values match the company's. So if one company has a value of integrity, they might ask, describe a situation where you have demonstrated integrity. Or if they want to see what values are important to you, they could ask, tell me about a time when you have worked at an organisation that has matched your values. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the sorts of questions that they might ask, and exploring the different types of areas of your CV, competencies, behaviours, values. But as I said, don't worry too much about exact categories. They're all asking about past behaviour and past experiences. So let's look at this competency-based question then. So a strong candidate will use the STAR method to structure an answer, because this is a really useful way to communicate important points clearly and concisely. So you may have come across STAR before. A lot of you possibly have heard about it, but maybe don't employ it in an interview. It's maybe a bit too, you know, there's too much going on in the interview to think through that. So a colleague of ours at 10-2 was talking to me the other day, and she was talking a candidate through STAR, and she just explained it so simply. I hadn't really related it to this. She said, think of it as a story. If you can't think of it as STAR, think of it as a story. Think of it as it has a start, a middle, and an end. So relating it to that as well, think about that. That might just make it a little bit easier. So STAR method, obviously situation and task is your S&T. That's describing quite succinctly the task that needed to be completed. So for example, I led a group of colleagues in a team presentation to potential clients. That's the situation. What was the action? So explain this way, explain what you did and how you did it. In this case, we presented to around 20 big industry players in the hope of winning their business. I delegated sections of the presentation to each team member. There's the action as well. And we discussed our ideas in a series of meetings. After extensive research and practice sessions, our group presentation went off without a hitch. And then the result, describe the outcome. As a result of this hard work and team effort, we won the business of 15 clients. Straightforward and to the point. So let's now think about some on-the-day basics. As I said, some of these you probably are aware of. It's worth just having this little checklist to make sure you do cover these off. So, excuse me. So if you've got a video interview, test your tech, make sure it works, make sure your screen is at a good angle and you're not sort of, top of your face or bottom of your face. Make sure your background is blurred or with a backdrop of some kind and that you haven't got any background noise going on. And if you're interviewing through us, we can help you with some of this as well. We also do have a recent webinar recorded on YouTube about presenting yourself with impact online. So we could share those details tomorrow or when we send the information out as well. So turn your phone off or mute it. Though face to face, obviously we have talked about one of the planning sessions for interviews, arrive with time to spare. It would be so much better to be sitting for half an hour in a reception than being 5 minutes late. Remember your body language, always smile, and do try to relax. And it's easier said than done sometimes. Mention distractions. So don't be afraid when you're in the interview, if there is something that is wrong about your situation, maybe on a wobbly chair or you've got the sun shining in your face, don't be afraid to mention that and ask if you can possibly change the situation. Appear interested. Let's have a look at that one. So it sounds obvious, but we have had feedback before where candidates have looked bored or disinterested. Probably they were nervous or petrified and couldn't get past that. So try and be mindful of that. Listen carefully to the question and allow the interviewer to finish. Answer questions directly. As we've said, the STAR method helps this, but stay concise, don't waffle. And if you don't understand a question, just say so and ask for them to repeat it. Be honest. You've got your CV, you might have a LinkedIn profile, you're answering questions, just be yourself and be honest. Everything needs to match up. Take your time. So if it's a complex question, gather your thoughts and don't worry about a few seconds of silence. And equally, you could say, oh, can I just have a few seconds? I'm just going to think about that one. That's absolutely fine. Stay positive. And by this, what we mean is stay positive about your previous experiences. So we may all have had a not a very nice experience with an employer, but just try to be factual about that and be, just factual and as positive as you can be. And always maintain professionalism. So this links to that question, but also interviewers can be unprofessional sometimes. So you maintain your professionalism. So don't mirror their behaviours. Show you're keen. If you are keen, say you're keen. If you like the sound of the job, say you like the sound of the job and that you're keen. And finally, shake hands and smile. On the day, questions. So let's have a look at some of this. So know how to describe your strengths and characteristics. So it is really hard to talk about yourself, but that is what an interview is. Can't get away from the fact that's what it is, but it feels really uncomfortable for a lot of people. But make sure when you do describe yourself, you're talking about yourself in language that you're comfortable with and that comes across and it reflects you and it shows you're confident but not cocky. So it's finding that balance. Know your CV and the job description inside out. We've talked about it a few slides ago. It may seem obvious, but knowing your CV inside out and those experiences on that CV is critical, to answering your questions. It's a good, as I've said before, it's a good idea to have in mind 2 or 3 specific projects or roles that you've done that you can draw your answers from. And when using examples of achievements, don't forget to try and use facts and figures to bring them to life. Use your research that you're doing and you've done to tailor your answers. So when answering questions, keep in mind what you know about the context of the role and the company. So, for example, if the role wants experience of implementing new software in a finance department and you haven't done this, but you might have run a project implementing software in some other kind of capacity, that shows that you've done that skill, you have that skill. So bear that in mind and bring that in. And finally, know your agenda. So from your prep, you should also know what key messages you want to get across. And although you can't control what the interviewer is going to ask you, try to keep in mind some of the key things that they are looking for and somehow try and slip those in. And it might be in those projects that you've done, those set pieces in your head. So just try and know sort of the agenda, if you like. So trickier questions on the day, and these come up in all of our process, from writing your CV, cover letter, explaining away things. This comes out through the process, and it's no different. They come up in interviews as well. So let's have a look at the first one. Career gaps. This is so common for us. So if you've had a gap and they ask about it, don't linger, but be factual. If you can talk about positive things that you've done in that gap, such as going on a course, doing voluntary work, doing something, bring that up. If you haven't and you've had a gap and not worked or not been able to do any work, just be factual about it. That's what it is. It is what it is. Salary. So if you're asked about salary, give a ballpark figure, and say if you're flexible or not. It can be worth turning it around and asking what budget they have in mind. You might mention that flexibility is top of your list and you're open on salary within reason. But usually a salary range should have been discussed prior to interview to make sure no one's time is wasted. So ideally, you'd have an idea of what this conversation is going to be prior to the interview. And if that should also really be one of your research pieces, to try and understand that before you go to interview. The next one is flexibility. The flexibility question. So we can look at this in 2 ways. So first of all, the employer might ask if you're confident working remotely or what flexibility you have, or remotely or hybrid or part-time. If they ask that, if you're comfortable doing all of that, because they might want to understand that you are self-motivated, you can get on with it. Explain any roles you've worked in before where you've been a job share or you've been part-time or you've worked remotely, so that you've got examples. If the topic of flexibility crops up, this is a good time possibly to ask them what they're looking for as a business. So find out what they as a business are happy with in terms of their flexibility and what the business needs. It's probably better to do it that way and then take that away after the interview to think about your own circumstances and see if it would suit your circumstances than be too specific in the interview. So if they asked you about flexibility, rather than stating, I definitely want to do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm not negotiable, try and get the information from them and take it away, because you want this interview to be so positive that they love you and therefore you have a little bit of time to think in the background at home if it would suit you and if you can make any changes. And if not, they might have fallen in love with you so much that, you know, you never know. So another question that comes up is the childcare question. So with this, interviewers sometimes ask about whether you need to set up childcare. They shouldn't, but do. One approach is not to explain all the options you've got or say you've got to look into it, but simply say that it's not a worry and that you have options to choose from. Another one, are you too senior for this job? Which we've all heard a number of times. So it could be perceived that you're trading down if you've done a more senior role in your past career than the one you're being interviewed for. Why would you be happy doing this one? You know, you may need to convince them that you can do a job at that level, you'll make a valued contribution, you won't be bored, you won't leave within a month. So you need to be prepared for those kinds of questions. The answer of I just want to work may be true to you, but it won't stack up. It won't get you the job. If you know, you need to be convincing that you are a stayer and you will stay doing that job. And finally, asking great questions. Oh, pardon me. So here we go. Asking great questions. So this always comes up. If you're keen on the role, you might well be really buzzing and have lots of genuine questions that you've thought of throughout the interview. However, it is definitely worth having some in your back pocket. Use your research that you did prior to ask things relevant to the role in the company. You know, you might go, oh, I know you just opened a new office. Are there any plans for further expansion? Level of marketing spend you currently have? What does the 5-year picture look like for the company or the department? You know, I've seen you've just received funding. What does that mean for the business? So there's lots of stuff you could glean beforehand from your research. And I think try to avoid the questions which are, you know, how much holiday do I get, or all those sorts of things, because that's usually listed. So try to think more about the business. So to summarize, I don't know how we're doing on time, but we all right? Yep. Okay,
Yeah.
very quickly. Obviously preparation, preparation is key. It is the foundation to your interview, that knowledge and that information. Spend time on your CV and the JD, and don't forget the basics. Tailor your answers, you know how to describe yourself and feel confident about how you're describing yourself. It's easier said than done. Relax and enjoy. I'm sorry, I know it's so hard to actually relax in an interview, but please try and remember it is as much about you finding out about them as it is them finding out about you. It is a two-way street. And then ask great questions. So do try and prepare those questions. So, time for some questions. I think we have a few minutes.
We have, yeah, we've got some time. Well done, Tracy. Thank you very much. As ever, that was really, really useful. I hope everybody's got something out of that. I've got some short and slightly longer questions.
Yeah.
First one, is it okay to take in a copy of your CV as well as a notebook to take notes throughout the interview?
Yes, absolutely. So I would, in terms of the copy of your CV, definitely. Yeah, that shows that you are prepared. And notes, yeah, it is fine to take notes into an interview. And I think if we have a lot of history, sometimes it's worth having bullet points or notes to remind us of some of those projects, for example. But try not to refer to them too often, as it could distract from the interaction with the interviewers. And you might want to check with the interviewer that they're okay with it too. I mean, it's obviously from a video interview, it's a much easier proposition. You've got them around you on your desk, so that's easier. So yeah, I think it's okay, but just don't rely on them as a script.
Sure, sure. Lovely. Going back to the flexibility question, this one, actually, you did touch on it, but it's quite an interesting question. So somebody said, I'm interviewing for jobs now. Some are full-time, all are hybrid. They mention in the advert they're open to flexible working. I want to request flexible working to collect my kids from school a few days a week. So they're saying, what stage do you bring it up in the process?
Yeah, I think we would recommend raising flexibility as early as possible, that as early as you possibly can in the process. You know, 80% of candidates now, I'd say, are seeking flexibility in the workplace. So it's a sensible question to ask. And in this case, if they've stated they are open to flexibility in advance, it shouldn't be too much of a shock. Um, if you can, as we said earlier on, if you can secure that interview, you try and wow them in the interview. So really, you want them to see how keen you are on the role and how good you are. If the conversation moves to flexibility, raise your requirements at that stage. Yes, so raise your requirements at that stage.
I sort of feel like there's probably a point which is you could say, you've mentioned flexibility. How
Yeah,
does the current workforce you work
yeah,
flexibly?
yeah,
Because I think that's always quite a
yeah,
good question to ask employers about, because if the whole company is working hybrid and they
yeah,
say, well, yeah, lots of people leave early to pick up their kids, you know that it's not a problem, and you haven't actually asked a direct
yeah.
question about your circumstances. So that could be
That's
an
another.
approach.
Absolutely, yeah. And employers, they can flex their requirements. We do work with employers that are prepared to flex and bend once they've met the right person. But I mean, just be aware if it is absolutely a full-time role and that's what it's been advertised at, and they don't really demonstrate any kind of flexibility, then you're probably, there probably isn't as much chance of that
Yeah,
conversation happening. So
sure.
it sounds from what you're describing from this question that they've talked about flexibility a little bit anyway. They've talked about that. So
Yes,
there should be room to talk about it and negotiate it a little bit, I'd have thought.
sure. Okay. Um, okay, this is, you're not going to like this one. How do I best answer the following? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Because, of course, that's one of those questions that often you're asked when you're very young, and you can answer with some big ambitious response. Whereas if you're not necessarily at that place in your career, it's quite a trickier question, isn't it?
It is, and it is, but it doesn't. Not every employer and not every job is intended to be the next MD. And certainly the jobs you're going to, you probably have an idea of what you have an idea of where you want to be. You might be going back to work because you're so excited. You've finally got, childcare sorted, school sorted, whatever it is, and you're so excited about going back to work. You get that excitement across in the interview that you're so excited to be back in work. Your 5-year plan could be, you could still be in that job, but learning more. You might be learning a new skill in that job, being going on courses, but improving areas within that job. It doesn't mean they are expecting you to say you want a promotion in a year, or
Yeah.
you see yourself in 4 years being marketing director when you go in at marketing exec level. It doesn't. So don't feel pressured that that question means that promotion. It can be self-development in lots of other ways. It can be enhancing the skills you've got. It can be refreshing skills you've got.
Or just to play devil's advocate, if it's a steady Eddie type of job, they might actually want you to say,
Yeah,
I want to be doing this job,
yeah,
doing it to the best of my ability, and improve all the processes around it.
yeah,
It needn't be anything. It's one of those questions you mentioned earlier about how is the candidate thinking. So
yeah,
it's understanding a bit more about where you are as an individual, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, and that's if you've done your research on the job and
In
you've read
that,
the job description and you've read a bit about the company, then you'll probably have an idea where it's going or what they're thinking.
yes, yes. I've got a question here about when an interviewer wants to do an initial 15-minute chat, what
Yeah,
preparation is needed, as it clearly can't be very detailed.
I know. These are funny ones, aren't they? They say they want a 15-minute chat. They are still going to be establishing if you're a good fit for the business. Um, and they are still going to touch on probably some of your experience, some of the skills. It might be a quick question. It might be a quick question on the CV. It might be a quick question on your skills. So even though it is 15 minutes, be engaged, be enthusiastic, still do your research, and still prepare. Maybe not the full-on preparation, but you still need to be prepared that they might ask you in those 15 minutes. 15 minutes, you can ask quite a few questions.
You can, yes.
So I would almost go into it thinking this is really an interview.
Yes, okay. I mean, I'm sure one of those first questions would be, why did you apply for this job? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a basic
Oh,
question.
yeah. Why do you want to work for us? What is it
Yeah,
about us? It could be
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so prepare. It's always
And
prepare,
it's,
isn't
it's,
it? That's
it's
the
always
answer.
prepare. And the assumption is, I mean, let's be positive. The assumption is if you go for your 15 minutes, if you've done a lot of research, you're going to feel confident that you're ready. And they might ask you for an interview in a couple of days' time after that. So you're going to have to do your research anyway for the
Yes.
next stage. So
Yeah. Um, okay, I'm going to touch on this one because we've got 3 minutes left. Um, um, somebody's saying that they're moving within their own company, but the main reason is it's a relationship breakdown with their current line manager. Um, and they're saying, what is a short sentence to keep yourself sounding professional without dwelling on that sort of thing?
yeah, that is a more tricky one. That goes back to the always be professional, be factual, because you don't want to be seen to be doing anybody down, or
Mm.
you don't want that sort of negativity to come into it. So um it also it might be common knowledge in your company while you're
Yeah, they've
moving.
said that.
So
Yeah.
within that interview, that is a particularly tricky question, actually.
I think I would focus on, I'm moving because I want either more responsibility or a different type of work, or so I would probably just steer it away entirely from
Yeah,
the reason. That isn't the reason.
yeah,
I actually want to do a different job.
yeah.
Um,
Find a positive, because if you are applying internally for another job, you are probably excited about that job. Hopefully you are looking forward to it anyway,
yes,
rather than it being a forced move. So if you are looking forward to it, yeah, find all the positives you can
yeah,
about it. Just
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's more tricky when it's an internal one as well, particularly, I think. If you're moving externally and you've worked for a company and nobody knows them, you can be practical about it. You don't need to, it's sort of washing's not being aired sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you, Tracy. We're out of time, I'm afraid. That's been really, really good. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. We'll follow up with the recording in a couple of days, plus any questions we haven't had time to answer. So
yeah.
enjoy the rest of your evenings, and
Right,
we'll see
Bri.
you again on a webinar soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Free. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.